Navia is an absolutely beautifully designed character that has impressed a lot of people, not only with her design, but also her significant role in the Fontaine story. As we know in Genshin, 5-star female characters tend to perform quite well on banners, and just in general be quite popular. The thing is that did not exactly work out the best for a similar character, Dia. She was introduced in the beginning of Sumeru and was given many patches for people to fall absolutely in love with, and they did, but then her release didn't exactly go as planned. Now Dia, we know this is for one of two reasons. It's either because she's so weak or because she's standard, and for most people it's probably a combination of both. Many people roll for characters they love without even caring what their kit does, let alone if they're viable or not. Though for many the viability really does matter to an extent. It doesn't always matter a lot, but when a character is really weak, that may impact how they feel about rolling for the character. Not to mention, given that she was standard means that at any time you can lose a 50-50 and get her, and while that can be an incredible gamble, it can still happen. You can't have that happen for any other limited characters, which I know is an unbelievably low chance and a lot of people just aren't willing to take that gamble, but it can still happen. And if you ask me, I think that is better than waiting over 500 days for a character like Eula. And honestly, without any news of triple banners in sight, characters like Eula taking that long to rerun, stories like that are only going to become more common. Okay, so this video is about Navia. Why even bring up Dia? Well, Dia shows us that no matter how much people love a character, there are always going to be factors that will drastically hinder its performance on a banner. For Navia, that is Geo, as sad as it is to say. And not only that, the fact that she is another Geo Claymore, which we can only assume at this point is another DPS because our other two Geo Claymore DPS, well, that may not exactly be the most exciting thing for people because it sounds like just more of the same. Like, look, Geo is not without its fans, just like anything, but to deny its overall lack of popularity would be nothing short of hard denial. You can take a character like Ito that is beloved by many. I mean, in my own character poll where I asked over 8,000 people who their favorite character and least favorite character was, Ito was in the top 5. Despite that, he still doesn't sell very well. Ito is even a perfectly viable character, not insanely strong by any means, but also not weak, so compared to Dia, you can't even say it's because he's bad. Although even being mid-tier might be enough to make many players just not even consider the character. Point being that he's no Alhaitham, but he's still capable of doing all the content in the game with even just modest artifacts. But there is a catch there. You kind of need a whole team of Geo, which, as we know, Geos is not very popular. And not only that, you need 2 other limited 5-star Geos and a C6 Goro to play Ito optimally. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't some flexible teams where you can use a couple other characters and be a little bit worse, but that is his best case scenario. And that is not exactly great for being appealing unless you're a fully devout Geo fan already sold on the Geo element. It's just, those are not the people that we're looking to get here. Geo fans probably already roll for everything Geo because they can afford to easily because they rarely show up. But they probably rarely show up because people don't buy them. After all, Hoyoverse is a business at the end of the day. They want to make a product that makes them good money. And sadly, Geo characters just aren't doing that historically. Now you can blame that on the state of the Geo characters themselves, or the element, or the fact that they're not making more of them, so they don't exactly have a lot of support. But I also don't like the idea that Geo should only succeed with other Geo. I think that it just makes more problems for the element. But anyway, so going back to my opening statement, Navia has a beautiful design that has appealed to many people and is story significant with an interesting personality, and she's Geo. So to me, those are two very strong opposing forces. Navia is a character that if you didn't know anything about her element or weapon, you would look at her and be like, oh, this character is going to sell well, especially if you factor in her role in the story. I think Navia fills a role that people generally like. She feels like a champion of the common people, has a good moral compass, and just overall is a really likable character. So then it becomes a question of, is that enough to overcome the unpopularity of Geo and just being yet another Geo Claymore? Because I think that is going to matter to a lot of people. There is another major obstacle that Navia faces, and that is the fact that people just spent a lot of primos getting Farida because she's so insanely popular, as you would expect from a Region's Archon. Then even after all that is said and done, when we finally get our hands on her, then we need to determine how good she is, because if she is insanely strong, like let's say like Wanderer, he's a very strong unit, and it's not because he's got some insane transformative reactions with Animo, it's just because he does really high Animo DPS, just like Ito does with Geo. And now that we have Farina, we have this generic gigantic damage percent bonus steroid that you can use to buff anybody. I mean, like Ning Wong probably got better from her, not that I actually gave her some real tests. We know Noelle got better from her, and there's no reason to believe why she won't also benefit Navia. Ultimately, Ultimately, it comes down to the fact that no matter how strong Navia is, one of the fundamental flaws of Geo from a widespread appeal standpoint is the fact that in a game that prides itself on elemental reactions and being creative in team building around that system, Geo stands firmly against that, having only one reaction crystallize for 4 of the 6 other elements, leaving Anemo and Dendro to be non-reactive with it, which, to be fair, in its own way creates some interesting teams and opportunities where you can include Geo in some Dendro teams without interfering what the other 3 members of the team are doing. And in regards to Dendro, Cryo has the same thing, and it also creates some interesting teams. It's just, I'll say that, at least in my opinion, I think the Geo side of that is a lot less interesting than Cryo, not that I really even like the Cryo ones that much. But ultimately, all of this does still make Geo a rather dull element for people to use. Same with Physical, and I mean, I think most people agree that Physical is in a way worse place than Geo is. Both of them barely interact with the reaction system in Genshin Impact at all, and Navia has to overcome this by having a kit that is so appealing on its own that people don't even think or care about the element that she is, which I would say we more or less already have units like this. Nuvolette barely utilizes any of the reactions that Hydro has for what they are, and instead use them to significantly buff his own Hydro damage. Typically, those Hydro reactions are what make Hydro the meta powerhouse that it is, and despite that, he's been quite popular. Many people in my own Discord server were pretty sad when they ultimately had to skip him, even though they originally had no intentions of getting him. Problem there is that Fontaine has just been stacked with super interesting characters. Not only have they all had really good designs, but they all have really interesting kits. I genuinely hope that Navia really continues this trend. I think Fontaine is it's a big turning point in Genshin's character designs. You know, we've seen the move from adding normal attacks to constellations, which were long overdue. I mean, Ganyu has like skill damage on hers, and like, she doesn't need that. Even though one of her constellations does give her an extra charge on her skill, it is never a significant portion of her damage. And now that we're at least a few versions into Fontaine, we've seen that the units that they're releasing synergize excellently together. You know, with Farina being really at the center of that, benefiting from all this HP drain and stuff, I really hope that Navia's kit in some way, shape, or form, aside from just synergizing with Farina, because Farina is really like, she's what bacon and cheese is to food to the Genshin cast. You know, any team, she pretty much makes better for having her presence there. And when a Fontainian DPS like Nuvolette or Risley has built-in HP drain, she only gets even better. And if you also have built-in healing, again, even better for Farina. And having a guaranteed teammate that significantly buffs you can go a long way in viability. So I guess in that sense, Farina is both helping and hurting Navi, you know. From the sales standpoint, she is definitely the lightning rod for sales right now. The characters before her didn't do the best, they did well, and the characters that come immediately after probably aren't going to do the best either, because people are just spending so much on Farina. At the same time, you could say that having Farina gives you more freedom to pull for whoever you want, because you know you pretty much have one support that's going to work with them. What does worry me is that if Navia does really bad in her initial sales and continues to do bad in reruns that come afterwards, that is really going to hurt the credibility of Geo in Hoyo versus Mines. That they'll just be completely discouraged from making new Geo 5-star units, especially because why wouldn't they be? I mean, again, these are products to sell. If they're not selling well, you don't make them, or you just make them a lot less. The simple solution to all of this is to just make Crystallize a more interesting reaction, which granted is a very hard thing to do in the current state of the game. We already have things designed around the way Crystallize works now, so it's kind of hard to rework Geo into this reaction element that is kind of like Hydro, where it does a different thing with each element. I don't think you could do that. The ship has kind of sailed. So what you do instead is you make it interesting through artifacts, through weapons, through new characters. There are so many ways they can do it without actually changing the way the reaction works. And of course, they can also just buff the reaction so the shields are better. I mean, after all, if you could basically just include a Geo support like Albedo and almost use him as a sustained character, that would do a lot to help Geo's viability and just make him more interesting, because now you have this off-field support that doesn't interfere with their reactions and can also fill a similar role to Zhongli. Granted, in that case, it does step on his toes a little bit. Call it foolish optimism, but I really am hopeful about Navia, you know? Again, the Fontaine characters have just been knocking it out of the park. I mean, even like Linny, and which in my opinion is the least interesting Fontaine 5-star we've got so far, is still a really cool kit. Much like Nuvolette and Wanderer, he's not really relying on the reactions that generally make Pyro interesting or good. So, you know, we have characters that can succeed without reactions. Geo might just have the stigma around it that people don't like it, that it's like the earth element. And I know generally in things that have different elements, earth, rock, whatever the hell you want to call it, is generally less popular. Combine that with the fact that the element is represented by like yellowish orange, which really aren't popular colors either. It feels like everything is just stacked against Geo in this case. case, and that Navia has a lot of work to do, that she is fighting one hell of an uphill battle. Once her kit gets officially revealed to the public and people can really start forming opinions on her character other than just like her design and her thing, I'd be interested to know if people that generally haven't liked Geo characters in the past are finally going to be swayed towards the element. I'm just excited to see how this shakes out. You know, either way, like I love every element, less so Cryo, but generally the element of the character doesn't matter to me. All that matters is that their kit is interesting. Do you think that she's going to be Geo's last chance, or do you just think like even if she succeeds that things are just going to go on as always, we're just not going to get many Geo characters? My opinion on that is that even if she is a wild success out of nowhere, like I don't think things are going to change positively for the Geo element very much, except maybe the people's perception of it. But as far as Hoyo is concerned and actually making these characters, I don't think it's going to change anything. But if she does do really poorly, I think that will impact it. But maybe I'm just being pessimistic there. In any case, thank you for watching, or probably listening in this case. Pretty light on the editing today. I had a long day. Thank you to my members, my patrons, for supporting me as always. And I'll see you in the next one.
Attaboy!